Often when we're suffering in life, when we're struggling in life, we feel alone. And in many ways, we turn inwards, isolate ourselves, and really do create a situation of being and feeling that it is just us who are in this situation. Now, sometimes just us might include a couple other people, a spouse or a sibling, or kids, or a family, however you might want to define that. However, our struggles, while they might be lived out in community as we live our lives, do at times bring us a certain sense of isolation. The start of today's reading from Luke is a bit jarring for me, partially because we often start reading this at least 6 verses earlier, where Simon of Cyrene has to carry the cross of Jesus. And Jesus tells the daughters of Jerusalem not to weep for him. It's also jarring, though, because it starts with 2 others also. This isn't just a story about the crucifixion of Jesus. It's a story about the crucifixion of 3 people, one of whom happens to be Jesus, and the reason that we tell this story over and over again is because of the involvement that Jesus has in this story. Of course, the 2 criminals who were crucified with Jesus have different reactions to their situation. One calls out to Jesus to save them all, to save himself and the 2 other criminals. Now, in my mind, that really is a plea by the one criminal to be saved himself. The other, though, says that they deserve to die, and Jesus doesn't. Then he follows it up with a plea to be remembered when Jesus gets revealed as the Messiah. All of this suffering, the physical suffering of being on the cross, and the internal suffering of trying to figure out what is happening to themselves near the end of their lives, is played out in the most public of ways. I certainly don't want to suffer at all in life, and would not want either for myself. And I certainly wouldn't want either to be so public. Hence, what we talked about earlier, the desire, almost the self-protective desire, to turn inward when we begin to suffer. In the end, though, we do not hear about the other 2 who were crucified with Jesus. We know that the process is painful and results in death. And so we assume they died, but we don't know if they died before or after Jesus, or at the same time. We only hear about the ending time of the life of Jesus. And we hear it in this from Luke 23, verse 46. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. In the end, Jesus gave up the struggle. For those of us who have been with someone who breathed their last, we know how holy and powerful and how scary that moment can be. I can only imagine that it would have been the same for the part of the community that had gathered at the feet of those crosses. Now, we have a long-standing theology about how we describe God, and in particular, how we describe the Trinity. And seeing Jesus address God as Father in this text certainly brings that to the forefront again. While I'm no scholarly theologian, I often think of the Trinity as a form of community. Three that operate as one, and yet operate as three as well. We use that language of community in our own descriptions of church. St. Elizabeth puts on a bazaar. Holy Cross hands out oranges and bananas to runners. We know it's not Mary's cousin who puts together a bazaar single-handedly. And we know that the oranges and bananas don't miraculously appear from the ends of a cross for runners as they go by. We know how community operates and how it takes individuals within it to operate as well. It is an individual who brings our reading to the end. As I said, no longer do we hear about the two others who were crucified with Jesus. We hear the words of one person, an individual, spoken alone. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, "Certainly, this man was innocent. For me, these words, while they might have been spoken alone, were really spoken on behalf of the community that gathered at the foot of those crosses, the community of disciples who followed Jesus day in and day out. And I even suggest that those words were spoken on behalf of the community of believers who believe today." See, we know the power that one person can have in changing the world, for that's why we follow Jesus. We know that the words of one person can change our worldview, and I'd even say in that end, we know that the simple presence and statement of another person can remind us that we do not really suffer alone. For our God, who is one, who is with us, through the lives, faces, words, and actions of others, is always with us. Yes, at times our suffering is hard. However, we know in the depth of our being that we are never truly alone in our faith, in our belief, in our community, and in our God. Jesus commended his Spirit back to the source of all being. And on this Good Friday, may we be willing to commend our spirit to God as well. Let us commend our spirits to the God who holds us in community, even in the midst of our suffering. Amen.